So often, human beings have food at the centre of socially significant activities. We know that the abundance of cafes and restaurants today in our culture isn't just because we have a basic primeval need for ingesting food. Cafes are just as much, if not more, about social interaction and hospitality, maybe even more than they are about nutrition. Many culturally and religiously significant rituals around the world include food or drink of some kind. And one of the few Christian rituals that is prescribed by the Bible for Christians involves food. Communion, or the Lord's Supper, known in some churches as the Eucharist. The significance of this simple meal goes right back to the very beginning of the Bible's story. In around 1400 BC, the Jewish people were slaves in Egypt. They were told that God was going to rescue them and to bring them into a land of freedom. And the Jewish Passover is the annual reenactment of their final meal before fleeing. God had sent a series of disasters to Egypt as a way of showing his power over all of the false Egyptian gods, as well as his authority over the Egyptian king. And the final disaster would be the death of every firstborn child in every family in Egypt, including the royal family. And this disaster is what finally convinced the king of Egypt to allow the Jews to leave. The night before, every Jewish family was to kill a lamb, paint its blood on their doorposts of the house, and then eat the lamb along with bread and wine. That night, the firstborn children of the Jews were kept alive as God passed over their homes, hence the name Passover. Now, Passover became an extremely important festival for the Jews, with the population of Jerusalem swelling to nearly 3 million pilgrims at its annual celebration. Families would set aside a lamb for the Passover meal, and they would bring it to the temple where it would be killed by the priests. Now, Jesus' death coincided with Passover. Not mere coincidence, but part of a deliberate plan. Jesus went to Jerusalem at that time, knowing that he would be arrested and killed. And on the night before his death, Jesus ate the Passover meal with his 12 followers. But there was something different this time. They ate bread and drank wine, but there's no mention of a lamb. This is because Jesus himself was about to take the place of the Passover lamb. The lamb was only a symbol of what was to come, when Jesus would give himself up to die so that we may be passed over and not receive the penalty of death that we deserve for our own sin. Jesus' death did away with the need for these symbolic animal sacrifices, and with it, the need for the temple in which the sacrifices were offered, and the priests whose job it was to offer them. So Jesus transformed the Passover meal into what we now call communion. Instead of being a meal that looks back to when the Jews were rescued from slavery in Egypt, it now looks back to when Jesus, by his death and resurrection, set us free from slavery to sin and death. So communion is an act that's both solemn and joyful. It's when we remember both the fact that we deserve the punishment of death from God because of our sin, and the fact that Jesus paid the punishment in our place. So communion is a reenactment of that last meal that Jesus had the night before he died. Jesus took bread. When he had given thanks, he broke it, gave it to them, saying, "This is my body which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And likewise the cup, after they had eaten, saying, "This cup that is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood." So when Christians eat the bread, we're expressing our acceptance of the fact that Jesus, the Son of God, became one of us, embodied in our humanity, so that he could share in our death. And when we drink the cup, we're expressing our acceptance of the fact that Jesus' death, the shedding of his blood, was a sacrifice which so perfectly represented us that we can be assured of a forgiveness that's permanent and complete. Nothing more can or needs to be done to make us right with God than Jesus' sacrifice. Now, there could have been other rituals used to remember Jesus' death, but God chose this act of eating and drinking. That's because this very physical, multi-sensory action of eating, involving all five senses of hearing, taste, touch, sight, and even smell, is a way of expressing that we don't only believe what Jesus did in our heads as a mere idea, but we receive it as a reality into our lives with a desire to have it shape who we are and what we do. We want to not only know about Jesus, but to know and experience him personally and always live in that assurance of forgiveness and acceptance that his death brought about. Now, there's one other ritual that Christians practice that comes from the Bible: baptism. This is also related to the story of the Jews' rescue from Egypt and to Jesus' death, and especially to his resurrection. As the Jews were fleeing Egypt, they became hemmed in between a body of water, the Red Sea, and the pursuing Egyptian army. And God separated the water of the sea, allowing them to cross over on dry land, and then when the army tried to follow, the water returned and drowned them and enabled the Jews to escape. Jesus' death and resurrection is described in the Bible as the way in which people escape the slavery of sin and death and begin a new journey into life. So baptism marks the beginning of a person's journey as a Christian. The act of going down into the water is symbolic of saying that our old life with its sin has died, and then we come back up having been washed by the water, symbolic of being a new person with a clean slate and a new start. Baptism doesn't make a person a Christian, but it's a way for the Christian community, the church, to acknowledge that this person is now a new member of God's family.